We'll begin with the announcement of closed session. We adjourned the morning session. We had a performance evaluation of CAO Richard Egan. He was given an excellent evaluation, and Supervisor Pyle abstained from that closed session. Okay, so we'll take up item F1. We have one item to take up before the ordinance issue.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, that matter was trailed over to the afternoon session so that we could get questions answered by members of the Fish and Game Commission. They're present. Mr. Armitage Chair is here, also Mr. John Boyd, who was present this morning. I think it was the chairman's question related to are these proposed bylaws the request of one or a few members, or is it the will of the Fish and Game Commission? The answer is plainly they were adopted unanimously in front of the Fish and Game Commission, I want to say September 18th. Is that a correct statement, sir? Thank you. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, very good. Okay. Then is there any further public comment on this item, F1? If not, we'll bring it back to action. What's the pledge of the board?
I'll move for adoption.
I'll second it. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Chair votes aye. Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to our 1:30 time certain. You want to get started with that?
County Council's going to lead off on this slide.
And so, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, can you hear me all right?
No.
All right. Thank you. That's for recording. Yes. Thank you. How's that? A little better? Yes. Excellent. I'm not typically someone that's accused of not making it. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good afternoon. We're here today at a study session related to possible updating of Ordinance 575. That's the county ordinance related to medical marijuana. This was scheduled essentially at Supervisor Pyle's request and the concurrence of other board members. That comes on the heels of expressions of concern from members of one of Lansing County's communities, and that prompted the larger question, which is, or was at least presented to me, is there an update to the ordinance that needs to be considered? Mr. Pyle asked for a study session be set, and we're here today. The matter was noticed in the newspaper. As you all saw today, we got number one story. The local radio covered the matter as well as SusanvilleStuff.com. So we hope we got the message out to those who are interested in presenting themselves for public comment on the matter. And so what I can say to you members of the board is this. Since the adoption of Ordinance 575 by this board in, I want to say, late 2010, if I have my date right, either late 2010 or early 2011, there has been a pretty good change in the law, or at least confirmation of what some had been arguing the law was. Prior to that date, let's go back just a little bit. In California, it continues to be a crime to cultivate marijuana under 11358 of the Health and Safety Code. Interestingly, it's still designated as a felony. If you possess less than an ounce of marijuana, it's a ticket. Maximum punishment, $290 fine, an infraction. And so there's some inconsistency there, but nevertheless, that remains the law. In 1996, California, the first state in the union, if I understand it right, to approve, and I believe it was by initiative, the prospect of the legitimate use, possession, and cultivation of medical marijuana, or marijuana for medical purposes. And since then, I believe 22 states have followed suit. And certainly we've seen broader activity legally in Colorado and Washington, with some anticipation that same effort will come to California in 2016. And so cultivation of marijuana and possession of marijuana continues to be a crime in California. And yet we've also seen a proliferation of the medical marijuana area in California. And so Prop 215 was passed in '96, and that empowered individuals with a valid recommendation from a physician to possess for their medical needs, and then also to cultivate for their medical needs, and or also to cultivate if they were a primary caregiver of someone who had a medical need. That initiative and that there was Senate Bill 420, which I believe came along in 2002, I want to say. And someone I'm sure will correct me on that if I'm wrong. But the point of Senate Bill 420, if I understand it right, was done for the purpose of trying to clarify what the people passed by initiative in 1996 by way of initiative. And so after Senate Bill 420 and until today, there have been a lot of unanswered questions about what precise rights were conferred upon the users or possessors or growers of medical marijuana in terms of where they can grow, how much they can grow, and the like, and where they can grow. So we got answers to some of those questions in, as I noted in my brief memo to you, in 2013, late 2013, and that was Morale versus City of Live Oak. Before Morale versus City of Live Oak came down, essentially what we have been seeing, and Lassen County has not been immune, and I've had some experience here in the sense that, as a former district attorney, I had occasion to review or get exposed to some of these scenarios, where we had what are referred to as collectives and cooperatives. And I think for a short period of time, we had perhaps a dispensary here or two. That was short-lived. But suffice to say, collectives and cooperatives are basically individuals gathering together for the purpose of collectively cultivating marijuana legitimately under the Prop 215 and or Senate Bill 420 auspices, pooling their labors, their resources, their growing skills, if you will. And so we've seen throughout our community in a number of locations, I'm sure all of us can probably give some specific addresses where there are grows that are occurring outdoors and in fairly large numbers. For the most part, those grows, if you will, have been checked out by law enforcement, although I did see the sheriff here. I'm not going to speak for him, and I'll let him comment on that if he wants to. For the most part, those grows have been found to comport with and otherwise be legal within the meaning of Prop 215 and Senate Bill 420 in that they are grows that folks have gathered together essentially to grow a large number of plants in one location. Typically what's found by law enforcement if they go out to the location is, a series of printed recommendations of physicians in different individuals' names. Based on that, I think that it has been difficult to enforce the criminal law as it relates to cultivation of marijuana under Health and Safety Code Section 11358 or possession statutes, which are other section numbers. And so that has essentially given some difficulty to law enforcement to deal with it that way, if that was the prerogative. But in 2010, I think there was a another study session that occurred. I don't know if it was in this room. I think it was at Jensen Hall. And the same issue came up, and the issue was dispensaries, and the board correctly adopted an ordinance at that time. It's Ordinance 575. It was part of your packet. It correctly reflected what we believed was the law at that time, which we've received some guidance on from the Court of Appeal since then. But what it did was essentially outlawed dispensaries as a function of zoning in Lassen County. It outlawed dispensaries, which we always believed dispensaries weren't legal in the first place, but that's another discussion. And it also limited cultivation in Lassen County to what was otherwise permissible pursuant to Prop 215 and Senate Bill 420. So collectives and cooperatives, basically. Nothing could be done about collectives and cooperatives because they were and are, to a certain degree, protected by the law. They're legitimate expressions of Senate Bill 420 and Prop 215. And then the question, really the lingering question, and City of Live Oak was the case that answered this for a lot of jurisdictions. Notwithstanding the fact that folks have a legal right under Prop 215 and Senate Bill 420 to cultivate marijuana for either themselves or if they're a caregiver, does that mean that you can have 60 plants topping 6 and 7 feet next to a schoolyard? Does that mean that you can grow as many as you want, wherever you want, with no regard for land use considerations? And that was the argument that was advanced by the City of Live Oak. And it was answered quite plainly in that case, as I've given to you. So essentially the law has changed since you adopted Ordinance 575, changed. The law has been clarified, if you will, by the Court of Appeal through that case. And they have essentially said, and interestingly, the California Supreme Court denied review of that case, which for stare decisis purposes means it is the law of the land. And basically, this board can, as a function of zoning, regulate the cultivation of marijuana, medical or otherwise. And as you have seen in some of the clippings that I included as part of your packet, which was, of course, available to the public, other jurisdictions have said about this process. It's a patchwork quilt, if you will. Some have chosen to ban it entirely. Some have chosen to, if not an entire ban, regulate the time, place, and manner in which cultivation can occur. And if they choose to permit cultivation to a certain degree and engage in the time, place, and manner restrictions, there's a whole series of other considerations, indoor versus outdoor, setbacks, plant count. And that's just the beginning. What about the enforcement mechanism that might be incorporated into any sort of an amended ordinance? That was something I noted in particular, and I think I would be irresponsible if I didn't mention. If there is an amendment to the ordinance that contemplates permitting cultivation, but only in certain enumerated ways, that there also be some form of a mechanism that can be effectively utilized to gain compliance with the ordinance as you approve it. So that's really the, I went on for a few minutes, but that's really the sum and substance of it. There has been a change, a fairly significant change, again, if you call it a change, since this issue was last passed upon by this board. And the question is I know there are diverse views on this issue. I know that there are very passionate views on this issue. And so I'm looking forward to hearing those today and receiving direction from this board. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Is there any questions from the board member of the county council?
Thanks, Bob. Okay, what we'll do is I'm going to first ask if there's any questions of the board of our county council, and then we will go for public comment. I think mainly what we're going to focus on is input from the public. This isn't an action item. It's just to take public comment, hear concerns, and from there we need to decide on which course of action. The decisions will. This meeting isn't set up to make those decisions today. It's to gather information and hear from you. I've heard a lot from my constituents about the concerns, some of which our county council has addressed, about large marijuana grows coming in next door to what was before, just a lot different dynamic. And when you have somebody come next door and have a large grow with large plants, it kind of isn't really what you bargained for when you moved into the country, so to speak. So those are some of the main issues that we need to address. So anyhow, any questions of board members of county council before we go to public comment? All right. I know there's going to be a lot of people that want to talk, so we need to really please limit our conversations to as close to 3 minutes as we can. And whoever wants to come up, just raise your hand and I'll pass you the microphone.
But I didn't want to comment yet. What I wanted to ask for was that the packets that were available and intake this morning. I got a version this morning as was not my voting. I did get a chance to read the paper. It was delivered today. Before I came here, I lived out in Milford. Do you have one of those packets that I can review?
I'll give him mine if he promises to give it back. It wasn't in the newspaper. It was what I referred to the paper or documents that had previously submitted. That was part of the board agenda today and the material submitted and was posted otherwise in anticipation of the meeting. But you can have mine, and if you just get back to me when you're done.
Skip as well. Some other
You bet. You bet. You bet.
And
Yes, sir.
we'll take public comment if you just want to, get in a queue. Get in a queue for the microphone. I guess would be the easiest. And just state your name for the recorder. Thanks.
Please.
Dr. Tom Gauthier. Well, that's a hot mic. I'm from Janesville. And 2 miles up Janesville Parade, exactly, because it's exactly across the street from my house. We have one working, and it's a real low-budget operation. A lot of junk wood and leftover wire, and a couple of pretty rough-looking vehicles and some funny people. But that's not my comment. Actually, the description is a public nuisance. We're on the main access to Antelope Lake. The kids are up and down that road. The school kids are up and down that road, and it's about, I didn't measure it, maybe 15 feet off the road. I know if we put in a junkyard, the law requires a fence. Fence where you can't see or access the junkyard. So I want to talk about the medical side. I want to talk about the drug side. I was raised by a drug enforcement officer in the 50s. So I have my opinions on that. But I'm looking at public nuisance, fire, and as I said, if it was a junkyard, we'd have a fence. Thank you.
Bill by Robin, 200 Cedar Street, Susanville. A few years ago, the then Board of Supervisors was put in a very difficult position.
People in the back, just have to be stand a little closer to the microphone.
A few years ago, the then Board of Supervisors was put in a very difficult position. The state legislature had interpreted the Compassionate Care Act into de facto legalization of the growing and use of marijuana. The people who voted the supervisors into office, and I suspect the majority of the supervisors themselves, have a not in my town attitude. They held a public meeting at Jensen Hall. There was one supervisor, by the way, who did not see the crowd in Jensen Hall as the enemy, as pothead riffraff, but as constituents appealing to their elected officials for redress. Thanks, Jim. That was refreshing. The majority, all but one, I believe, voted to outlaw co-op dispensaries in Pulaski County. I suggested at the time that the county regulate, monitor, and tax the dispensaries, turning a liability into an asset. The supervisors chose to bury their heads in the sand and pretend the issue went away. This meeting today is a direct result of that decision. I implore the current Board of Supervisors, please agendize this issue and change the policy to the only rational position. Legalize, regulate, monitor, and tax co-op dispensaries in Lassen County. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ronnie Chandler, and I run Critter Keepers, a boarding facility on Valley View Lane in Janesville. We have one of the, I believe, co-op situations. Apparently, our neighbor has allegedly 99 plants. We live on a rural road, not too far from the school. I spoke to Mr. Wasik right after he was elected with my concerns then. My biggest concern, I'm not on either side of the fence. I understand the necessity for the Compassionate Care Act. I'm not opposed to that. I am opposed to a big, large grow moving into our neighborhood a couple of years ago. The biggest concern, not only the smell, but we have a neighbor with a huge fence that is in ill repair. I took pictures as I drove by this morning. A big area under the gate where the guard dogs in and out frequently. I've spoken to him probably 100 times. Said, be a respectful neighbor. We won't cause you harm. You won't cause us harm. Well, he's no longer respectful. We have horses. We board horses on our property. We're not allowed down the street without calling him or yelling at him about the dogs. We have small children, a 3-year-old that lives on our ranch. The kids can't ride their bicycles because of the pit bulls. I'm not opposed to the dogs being pit bulls. The guard dogs that they're no longer in control of them. So yesterday, our neighbor called me to get my daughter's telephone number because she had posted on Susanville News about the meeting today, encouraging everybody to turn out for the meeting. So he called me, he threatened me, he harassed me 3 different times. I took the numbers, I caller ID. When the sheriff came down and made the report, he said that he said, I've been a diligent neighbor. If you want to see a bad neighbor, I'll show you one now. Now he's harassing me and my business. He's going to block the road. He's going to file suit against me for my business because I have too many horses on my property per acreage. I told him that I jumped through the hoops. I went to the Board of Supervisors. I was granted a use permit for my business. We go through all of the stipulations. We haul off the horse poop so it doesn't stink for our neighbors. Yet he can grow 99 plants, and we can't get away from that smell. And, I just think that if it's going to be a legal grow, then they should have to at least go through the same hoops we as business owners have to go through. He's above the law. He told me that this year he'll get me because he's going to plant all of his plants on the border of my property. Come on, really? What protection do I have? I'm a law-abiding citizen. We've done everything right. And we have these people come in, and I'm not objecting to the legal marijuana growth. But people like my neighbor is not a nice person. He's trying to cause harm to our community. If they came in and did their grows and they stayed to themselves and they were respectful, I wouldn't have a problem. I do have a problem now because he's threatened me and he's harassing me. So, what legal stance do we have? So anyway, I took pictures of the gate this morning. If you guys would like to see them. My ranch hand's wife lives on our property. She couldn't attend this meeting. Our kids can't walk back and forth to school. They can't ride their bicycles back and forth to school. We're no longer allowed to ride our horses in front of his house, even though it's our legal easement. What do we do? Who's there to protect us? Thank you. Thank you very much.
My name is Steve Madison, and born and raised in this county. It always smells like skunk in the fall in Madison County. Always has. The thing that I'm concerned about is you are looking at changing the ordinance that you've already written. The research I've done into this ordinance, and correct me if I'm wrong, the county based it on a white paper from the California Police Chiefs Association. Okay? It's about medical marijuana. If you're going to change the ordinance, you need to look at both sides. You can't just look at one side. You don't get a clear perspective of what's really going on. As to council saying that they could grow it anywhere near schools or whatever, the health and safety code says no closer than 600 feet. That school property line, the property line of where the person is going. So that is addressed. Also, you stated that possession and cultivation is still illegal. Under 215, people that have the need and the right to grow it are not affected by that portion of the law. So it does address that. It isn't that far apart. I just hope we can come to some kind of a conclusion where the people that need this are allowed to do it. Decisions have consequences. And if the decision is made and sick people go to jail, a lot of them senior citizens, that's a decision that you really have to take responsibility for. There has to be a different solution than always a law enforcement solution. And I also think that we should look at the dispensary problem one at a time around and see if there's something we can do. There's a fair amount of empty storefronts, 30 of them on Main Street. There's a lot of unemployed people. And it's a pretty good tax base. If you control it, you can get something out of it. Also, by being, every time it becomes more illegal, the price goes up. The higher the price goes, the more criminality. Alaska is considering a law for personal use that allows anybody over 21 to grow 6 plants. The end result in Alaska is the price is going to drop so far, nobody's going to go on and do it for business. It won't be at $50 a pound. There's no business to it. If the criminality is really a problem, kind of look at that as you're looking at amending the ordinance. And please don't forget, it's medical marijuana. These are patients. They aren't other. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I lived in Alaska County, been here about 20 years.
Can you just take it?
So my name is Hal Nixon. What was not addressed here this morning is a criminal element of growing marijuana under the guise of the medical marijuana industry. I am in favor of medical marijuana for compassionate use. I know it has tremendous effects on epilepsy. I personally know members of my family who are benefiting from this. But what is not being said here this morning is the price of marijuana on the streets of California has dropped from $2,000 a pound to about $800 a pound. If you look on Google Earth at all the grows in California, they're not getting 800 pounds here. They're getting 2,800 in Idaho. They're getting $3,000 a pound in Utah. I took a picture of a guy's plates from my neighborhood coming out with Florida plates on him this morning, leaving our neighborhood. He was not happy with me taking his plates and followed me all the way to here. So if you think there's no criminal element in the medical marijuana industry in Alaska County, you're just kidding yourself.
Hello, my name is Joshua Biggs. I live up in Lake Forest. Just down the street from us, we have individuals growing marijuana. Not only down the street, but also at a time, I don't know if it's still going on, but it was also in the rental property right next door to my house last summer. We could not open the windows to our house to cool the house down at night because the entire house would smell of marijuana the next day. I totally understand if someone has a medical need for this and they need to use it, and that's the law, and I understand that. I also know that when it was voted into law, the voters in Lassen County voted against it tremendously. Not just a small margin, it was a tremendous against. We are being ruled by the majority of the state, which is in these urban areas.